Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. This is episode 99.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis, sitting in the captain's chair. Wow, 99 episodes under the belt.
Actually, today you're sitting in the general's chair.
Yes, I am. Thank you. 5 stars. 4 stars. George S. Patton Jr. It's a heroes episode. Yep, a lot of people think of Patton as a hero. Some would think of him as a villain, actually. He's a controversial figure even today, these many years after his death and his triumph in many respects. He was one of the major figures in winning the war in Europe. And he was not without his detractors or his praisers all throughout. No question, though, the man was a leader. And he was a visionary. He knew very clearly what he wanted to do, and he knew exactly what it would take to do it. We're going to talk about him, his accomplishments, the man, the legend, the myth, all of the above today. Guys? Thoughts?
Well, I guess we need to get this out of the way, too. There are some sources, and we're not just totally informed here by the movie. As awesome as the movie is...
It's not generally inaccurate. There's some compressions and stuff done.
Actually, there are 2. Because there was the follow-on that showed his death.
Which was also actually very, very accurate.
Yeah.
And George C. Scott played the character in both. Yes. The movies, as you know, people are going to come in through that door. Yeah. We kind of understand that. And it's not a bad door. It's not. We do not want to simply say that this is completely fiction. The book that it was based on, several books it was based on, one was O.R. Bradley's memoirs.
And Bradley consulted on the film.
Exactly.
So, I mean, they made sure to make him look really good.
He was still alive. Carl Malden played him. And a lot of the stuff that went on, and also Bradley's assistant, Chet Hansen, who appears in the movie briefly, he wrote a rather detailed book about all this that was part of the based. The actual narrative, though, was based on a book called Patton, Ordeal and Triumph by the great journalist Ladislas Farago, who had written...
I'm glad he had to say that.
Well, I've got the book. It's
Farago.
actually... Yeah, it's back here behind me on my shelf, actually, paperback. I bought it years ago. It's a great read. The man knows how to write, and he got Patton. He understood it. That's kind of one of the things you wish for in a biographer, that truly understands. Now, the fact is that this was World War II. The documentation is bloody everywhere. I mean, we've got all the details of who went where and did what. Yep, that's all well known, well documented. And there were plenty of witnesses when the book was written and the movie was made still.
Because I feel like that, you're saying that he got Patton. Mm-hmm. Even with the film, Patton can be hard to reach.
He is, very much so.
He's complex.
He is contradictory at times. he is, and he calls himself a prima donna, and he admits it. And damn, he ain't wrong. Absolutely. And yet he's also the man that will go into a battlefield from 1,000 years ago, kneel down in prayer, and almost cry for the loss of life that took place there. That moment is captured in the movie. It's based on Bradley's memoirs. He was there with him.
In which battlefield was that?
It was on the way to the Battle of Kasserine Pass. Mm-hmm. But in the movie and in real life, Patton, for some strange reason, has the driver veer off the road, and he goes to some other, which he presumes is a battlefield. It was thousands of years ago, and the battle was here. The Carthaginians versus the Roman legions, and he goes through all that stuff like that. And that's, is it fantasy? Well, I mean, Patton really did have that moment. But
how it's expressed in the movie may be somewhat fantasy.
It's pretty accurate, because like I say, Bradley was there.
But it might be Patton's fantasy.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I want to be clear of. It probably was. Patton had no reason to think that. He's just one of those gut moments that he had. Patton was his favorite author was Rudyard Kipling, of all things, who is a complex character in and of himself. Especially, I submit that his love of Kipling was the pre-war Kipling. I can't say that for sure, but Kipling was very much a hawk until the death of his son. We've talked about that before, actually, in one of our early episodes. But so much of what happened with him is so well known, and yet he eludes us still.
I think that one of the interesting things about Patton is to go back to the beginning. So he was an officer at the time of World War One, and he is of a generation with Eisenhower and MacArthur. Right? You know, they are relative contemporaries, not the same class at West Point, but they are relative contemporaries.
Eisenhower and Patton were there together. I don't remember if they're the same class, but
right, that's what I'm saying.
They were at the same time. Yeah,
they are.
I think if I remember right, MacArthur's a little older.
He is. If I remember right, you're right.
About 10 years older. Marshall is just a year or two older, I think. So yes, that group is very much.
It's in a way
senior command.
In a way, it's a lot like the senior commanders in the Civil War. They were in the academy together, and they served in the Spanish-American War together.
Mexican-American War. I'm sorry.
Yes, Mexican-American. Yes, sorry. Close, but not quite the same.
Not quite the same.
But yeah, they served in Mexico together, and then they became leaders of the next war. And I think that's an interesting parallel. Now, granted, these guys are all on the same side, so that's where the parallel fails. Right. But not all of them actually got to go to war in World War One. Some of them missed out on it for various reasons, because really the U.S. wasn't there that long. I mean, it was less than a year.
You're exactly right. Yeah, Patton was artillery captain when he was there.
I think Eisenhower missed out on the European War in World War One.
And yet MacArthur had a fairly significant command, both during...
But he was also older, so that makes more sense.
And even after the war, because after the war, the United States Armed Forces shrank to almost nothing. MacArthur was the only one who really retained a significant high-level command during that time. Patton and Eisenhower, I won't say they're sidelined because they stayed in the Army, but they never rose to the levels in the peacetime that MacArthur did. And it was, I don't know if that's luck, I don't know if that's political pull.
No, I think that's the nature of all three men.
That's right.
MacArthur has a reputation as a political general.
You're right. That's exactly
That's going to get him farther ahead. Plus, being older, he's going to be a little bit higher in rank anyways, most likely. Especially having battlefield experience. So that's going to help push him along.
I mean, yes, they were both still essentially captains.
Right, exactly. And being that low level, and being not the administrative kind of officer, that's not where their talents are. Not that they can't do them, but I mean, obviously, you think of Patton, you do not think of a paper pusher. I mean, and you don't think of Eisenhower in the same way.
But Eisenhower, he got to do a little of both.
He did.
He got to have kind of some commands and some staff jobs. He got to see a little everything from every side. It really what made him effective. He could see things from every angle.
Right. Yeah, that's not Patton's experience. You're right. They do some of that. Patton's a combat officer, and that's really all he ever wanted to be. He says that in what he all the time and has been reported to us after the fact.
When I think of Patton, actually, what I think one of the quotes I think of is not actually a Patton quote, but I think it applies to him, and that's the quote you hear out of the mouth of Robert E. Lee. Especially, I presume this is a real quote because it sounds like him, and that is, "It is good that his war is so terrible. Otherwise, we would love it so much."
That describes Patton well. Yes, it does.
Because that's when it seems like that's when he was most alive.
There's a moment in the movie he says, "God help me, I love it so."
Yes, exactly.
That's kind of the thing.
Now, I don't know how accurate that quote is either, but it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
They are good at it. Especially when it comes to the tactics and
the training too, and the personnel and all the details that go into that.
Yeah, to peel back that mythos a bit, he and Eisenhower both, but Patton in particular, were really good at understanding how warfare was changing. Patton's an early advocate for motor transport. He's an early advocate for armor. Even before his World War I experiences, he's an officer with Pershing in Mexico.
That's right.
And uses automobiles effectively to go after...
This is before anybody was even thinking like that.
Right. He was after Pancho Villa.
Pancho Villa, the bandits in Mexico. Pancho Villa.
The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, their very first episode, has that moment. They actually show it, and you don't know who it is until the end. And say, I think Lieutenant Patton is going to be somebody. Of course, the audience gets, blah, blah, blah. But it was a real event. I mean, they inserted it in there. He did do that.
They were in a vehicle. They chased down 3 of Villa's bandits, I think it was, hopped out of the car and got into a gunfight.
And he straps them on the damn hood of the damn thing and brings them back. Yeah, he was definitely not a conceptual soldier. He was an action soldier. Now, he knew the concepts. He
was going to say,
he's instrumental in building them.
And he's visionary.
This interwar period.
He is instrumental in the development of tank warfare.
Yeah. Mobility.
Yeah.
Under great opposition at times. And there's a scene in the second movie, the TV movie, which has flashbacks where he's actually presenting mechanized warfare to a bunch of high-ranking army command, basically those who hold the purse strings. And he ends up saying, this is so simple, a child could do it. And it's his wife, who was there at the time, says, darling, would you mind driving this thing? And she does, in front of all these guys, to kind of make the impression, this is so simple, we absolutely should be doing this. It's just one of those little moments that get included.
It's one of the ways he was a visionary, because as Martin, you just said, he could see how things were changing and saw the need to change tactics. Because again, most generals, especially those at the staff level, they fight the last war. They come to the next war prepared to fight the last war.
Yes. And there's a value in lessons learned, but understanding, okay, but those lessons applied to the last thing we did.
Right. How are you going to take that in new ways to the next war? Because the guys you're going to fight, they learn the same lessons, and they're going to try and come up with new ways too. So, and I think what got him into trouble, and this is partially the kind of trouble that geniuses get into, and that is that they get so frustrated when other people can't see what is so blindingly obvious
to them.
Yes. That describes
that's where
Patton
he gets into trouble.
very, very well. That's correct. And in his younger days, he was able to convince pretty easily. But as he got older, he got more set in his ways, and that he was...
Well, when you're a general, you expect people to come to your way of thinking.
With an ego that he had, and there's nobody doubts that he had one.
Now, that's not to say, though, that he couldn't be sneaky and sly. We talked about this yesterday during our road trip and the little bit of road or show prep we did then, talking about how he was already planning on disengaging from the front he was fighting.
Yeah.
To come to the aid of the 101st, even though they did not need rescuing, which they were very, as we talked about, they're very sensitive about that.
Yeah.
But he disengaged an enemy at his front that he was fully engaged with and managed to do it in a way, it was not a retreat, it was not a rout, which is very difficult to do, and hit the Germans in the flank during the Battle of the Bulge. And he did it successfully. He did it in 3 days.
So,
and part of that is he was planning for that ahead of time.
Right.
And so he was convincing, they were talking about what to do. It's like, well, I can do this in 3 days. It's kind of like that Name That Tune. I can save your ass in 3 notes.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that is to me, after in researching all this, that's the quintessential Patton moment. Because he combines...
That's his greatest triumph.
His preparation with his doctrine with his leadership.
And his audacity.
Yeah, because he knew what his men could do, and they knew he believed in them. So, and again, this episode, to round it all out, again, the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans have taken this last-ditch drive towards Antwerp. They went through a weak sector, and they've completely surrounded the 101st Airborne Division in a Belgian town of Bastogne. And again, Patton, he prepping his staff and says, be ready, I'm going to a meeting with Eisenhower. Here's what we're going to do. Start drawing it up and have it ready. He gets to the meeting with Eisenhower and says, well, I can hit with 3 divisions.
In 48 hours.
In 48 hours. And they're like, well, George, you might want to give yourself a little leeway on that.
And that's at moments in the movie. That's correct.
Yeah, but it happens very nearly that way in real life.
Yeah, because Bradley was
and
was there.
They're like, okay, well, go ahead, George. So he leaves the meeting, gets on the phone, calls his command, sends them the code, play ball, and they know we're moving. And he does. And he moves north, hits the Germans on the flank, relieves the pressure off Bastogne.
There's a great moment in the movie when he describes that to the audience, but to himself too. He says, "No other outfit in the world could do what we've done. To turn around, march the other way with no rest, no sleep, no hot food. God, I'm proud of these men." Yeah. That's kind of the moment that explains it.
Yeah, and he, for all of his ego, he gave them a lot of credit.
That's right.
See, now I think this is the epitome of leadership. And
Yes.
this episode in his life, because on so many different levels. First of all, he's thinking 10 steps ahead of everybody else. Mm-hmm. He sees, even though he's fully engaged with an enemy to his front, he's aware of what's going on elsewhere, and he sees how he can help. Mm-hmm. So he goes off to this meeting. He tells his staff, "Get ready," and it's basically all. He doesn't say, "All right, this is the general order of how we're going to do this. Work out the details." He leaves all of that to them. He trusts his staff implicitly.
He's worked with them long enough.
And he knows that they will do what is required. And he goes to the meeting with his superiors, one of which used to be his subordinate.
That's correct.
You know, that's a humbling thing for a man of his nature in general. But he was never resentful from everything I've seen about Bradley becoming his superior.
They remained close friends.
Yeah.
And I would say Patton because Patton was considered for that command.
Yes.
And when it didn't come, and of course the movie shows the moment very well, when Bradley gets it, he's just like, well, shit, this is just as bad as it gets. And he just says, I just can't believe they're going to leave me out of this.
Right. It's not so much I can't believe they gave it to him.
Yes.
Which in a way is a lot of his ego talking.
That's right.
But when he goes to this meeting and he presents it, you know, like I said, he's already 10 steps ahead of his superiors. Probably the only two guys that outrank him in the European theater. I mean, there might be somebody else, but not many.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's in charge of an army.
Right.
He's got many peers, but ultimately he's got Bradley ahead of him and Eisenhower over him.
Right. So, I mean, these are the top three guys, essentially, in the European theater. And he's already 10 steps ahead of both of them. Mm-hmm. And they don't think he can quite do it. But they're also willing to roll the dice with him.
Well, they know him.
Because they know him. They know he's delivered before. And so it's not only does he understand and know what his staff is capable of, but as you said, he trusts his men. Mm-hmm. And that's the other part of leadership. It's not just that he trusts his subordinates. He trusts the guys in the field.
Right.
You know, the guys are belly to belly, nose to nose, you know, bayonet to bayonet with the Germans.
Yeah.
And that is one of the most overlooked elements of leadership. And that is not just training the people underneath you, but getting them to expect the most out of themselves.
Yep.
Because
he was very good at that.
That was the hardest thing. And I think to me, that is the essence of true leadership. It's not pushing your vision forward. It's getting the most, not only getting the most out of the people underneath you that you're leading, but getting them to expect the same or higher. And, you know, I've talked a lot about, fictional examples of leadership. Honor Harrington. And it's a similar, and there, you know, it's great because when you write leadership, you can be a lot more obvious about it. Right. You know, you play it up a little bit more. But it's the same kind of leadership. People don't want, the greatest leaders are those whose followers don't want to disappoint them. You know, the greatest leaders are those who say, this is the standard, and then turns and goes, expecting everybody to follow them, and they do. Mm-hmm. Because those are the kind of leaders that you want to follow, right? And if you can produce that, you are genius-level leadership. You know, there's functional leader. He's a functional leader because he's a general. But he's a true leader because of what he gets out of his people. And that's expecting the best out of them, and then they produce it because they don't want to disappoint the old man.
That's right. Old blood and guts. Which he hated, by the way. He did not like that nickname.
Well, he was a lot more sensitive. I mean, he was, in a way, you know, he had a very poetic soul in many ways.
Yes, very much so.
And that's unusual, too. He was a well-rounded man. He had a classical education.
Yes, he
did. We talked about it. You know, we could talk industrialization and men's fashion all day.
Right. A voracious reader, too. I mean, he knew all this sort of stuff. And that comes, he got that, honestly, from his very earliest days. He also had that military background in his family. He had his father and uncles were all military. They did military service as well. Confederate side, actually. So there was some
Sure, that would be his grandfather.
It was
grandfather.
I meant to say grandfather. Yes, exactly. But there was other pieces there in that family, and he says it in the movie so well. All I ever wanted was to lead an army in combat, and yeah, he does.
In a way that sounds like the 7-year-old kid.
And I think it should a little bit because
maybe. I mean, it
has
sounds childish and it sounds immature, but because hopefully nobody should ever have to do that.
Right. Yeah. Well,
but the reality is somebody's going to have to.
Well, he knows that's what he's good at. And
I think he could have applied that in other areas. But again, I'm not denigrating that desire.
Sure. And part of that was his background, his military background.
Right. And the recognition there's always going to be somebody to fight. It's a sad truth.
Yeah, he wants to Patton himself made a comment. It was during World War One. He was wounded briefly, shot in the butt, actually. And during that time, he on the fields of battle in World War One, he said he looked up and he saw the faces of his ancestors watching him, as he's there wounded, saying they're urging him on to do right by us, do what you're supposed to do, like in The Lion King, be who you are. That sort of thing.
Who are you?
That's right. It's the very same thing. That's kind of that which he instilled in those men that you talked about. They don't want to disappoint the old man. That was his motivation as well. He didn't want to disappoint those who went before him.
Right. That's the other thing. A good leader is not about what they want. A good leader should always be about what is good and right and true to begin with, but should be at service to a larger ideal.
Oh, Patton was definitely that.
And that's, yes. Mm-hmm. Because the ideal is what ultimately inspires everyone else. Because otherwise it's a cult of personality, and that can go south very quickly.
Yeah. Well, he didn't like that when he saw that other places. He accused Montgomery.
Yeah, like Monty.
He accused Montgomery of that, which is not fair.
Right.
But although Montgomery did have some of that, I mean, of course,
Well, so did Patton.
Well, that's correct. Yeah. Montgomery, living so long after the war, had a little bit of, we get to see that afterwards. For the rest of his life, Montgomery would sign his name, Montgomery of Alamein. That's how not Sir Bernard Law or any stuff, just Montgomery of Alamein. I mean, there's ego for you folks. But then again, is it arrogance if you can really do it?
Well, that's the thing. Guys like Patton, Montgomery, Eisenhower, Bradley, the giants of that level are all going to be a little bit eccentric.
Yeah.
Now, with Patton, maybe it was a little bit more than a little bit. I mean, there's the pearl-handled revolvers.
Mm-hmm. Ivory.
They're ivory.
Sorry.
Only a pimp in a New Orleans whorehouse would carry a pearl-handled revolver.
I was glad you did, because I was wanting one of us to pull that quote out from the movie. Because it's one of those moments. And by the way, we ourselves, where we live in Louisville, Kentucky, the Patton Museum of Armor is just about 45 minutes south for us at Fort Knox. And
it's an awesome place.
It really is. And Patton's pistols are there, along with the actual limousine where he was injured, ultimately mortally. It's on display there, as well as his uniforms.
Well, plus his command wagon, whatever you would call it.
Oh, absolutely.
Command car.
Command car.
No, it's not a car. I mean, it's like his roving.
Yes.
His field office.
Field office.
That's trailer.
That's all there. Many of his personal effects and aspects are all there. So we got the advantage of being able to, almost up close and touch the man. After the fact, and it doesn't shy away from his eccentricities that you.
When you're good, they're eccentricities.
That's right.
When you're bad, they're excesses.
He came very close to that, as you all know, and the movie shows it very well. But it was a very real incident where he slaps the soldier. There were plenty of witnesses, and that thing was documented because he was almost court-martialed. It was only his. For political reasons, that was there were reporters present. They almost pulled him. The Germans couldn't believe it because they didn't think politics worked that way in America. They did, but it was only his friendship with Eisenhower
Well, and Eisenhower knew he would need him eventually.
That's exactly right. Now, although
Eisenhower believed in him strongly.
I can't lose this man. He fights.
I'm glad you said it, because I was about to go there. That's exactly right. I mean, it was Grant was not, pulled out because Lincoln saw the need for that man. Same with Patton and Eisenhower. They were friends. It's
rivals.
It's even money how that ended, because Eisenhower had to relieve Patton after the war. He was military governor of Bavaria, and the second movie shows a lot of this happening.
Yes.
About how he basically he wouldn't denazify, as that was the big thing.
Right.
He says, you will do this, and
it shows also his vision of how things are, and how he was not a political general, because he was right in a lot of ways. I cannot totally denazify because I don't have anybody to run anything.
And
you couldn't do it. You couldn't hold any kind of an official post without being a Nazi.
Yeah.
So if he wanted to keep people fed, keep people warm, have enough fuel to
kept the water plant moving, keep clean water going to the buildings,
which
he couldn't get rid of everybody.
That's him being in the tactics. Eisenhower's strategy only, he says, sorry, you got to.
Well, his other thing was he was drilling the German soldiers that were in the POW camps, because he wanted to rearm them and turn around and fight the Soviet Union.
That's ultimately what did him in, because the political powers back home says, this guy's a loose cannon, you got to get him out of here.
Now, there was a time when we all sat around once and said he was right. Well, it turns out we were wrong about that, because we ended up not having to actually fight them.
Right.
But it was a better than even money bet that at some point at the time, we would have been back in Europe actually
with
fighting.
The specter of nuclear holocaust above us on that.
Which was not there, he didn't know anything about that yet.
Right.
Matter of fact, he died before the first bomb fell. It was after.
Yeah, it was in December of 45 when
That's
he
right,
actually
yes.
died. So no, he knew about VJ Day and all that sort of stuff. There's a moment in the movie when he's riding a horse talking about wonder weapons and all that stuff. It's kind of a little bit of a conceit. It was putting in something that was maybe not really there, or if it was a throwaway at the time that made it pretty palatable for 1970 when the movie was made.
But also I could see that being something he would say, because that takes all of the, for lack of a better word, honor out of.
That's what he says.
That.
I'm glad I'll never live to see it. Nothing is glorified. Nothing is reaffirmed. What's the wonder in that?
Yeah.
Well, as I researched this, and I want to talk about some of these, particular things, some of the stuff that he, and one of these guys that's heavily involved in understanding how to use tanks, how to use combined arms, how to use air power. Mm-hmm. Even though he's not a pilot and doesn't really know anything about aircraft and airwing, he understood what he could do with them. Because it was very much he understood close air support, and he knew that if he could bring close air support in, armor and artillery in, that gave him a ton of striking power then to follow up with infantry.
Well, he was also a student of war, amazingly. He knew instinctively things like at Waterloo, Marshal Ney's charge that was not by cavalry, that was not supported by infantry or artillery and all that stuff. And he saw those lessons of history.
Yeah.
So he's not going to make those same mistakes.
Yeah. So as I researched all of that, the guy that kept coming up in my head is Sherman. Mm-hmm. When you think about the same type of this eccentric, irrational, sometimes emotional, hated politicians.
Yeah.
But also understanding there is a new way of war.
Oh, yeah. They were both well ahead of their time in that.
Sherman understanding that it's not enough. You can get in all the battles with Lee you want, but if I can starve Lee, if I can deny him resources, I'm making Grant's job easier. Right. Sherman is understanding there's a whole new paradigm to warfare.
It's coordination between theaters.
Well, and then Patton is then understanding, too, there's a whole new way of warfare here.
What I think with Sherman, I think what you're also seeing is, whether he realizes this or not, I think it's a response to, it's a different kind of war. Civil War, the American Civil War is unique in history to that point for this very reason. It is the most ideological war. Because as we've talked about, it's about slavery.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what it means to be the United States. Whereas most civil wars are strictly power grabs.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Most wars, in general, are power grabs.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Us versus them.
Right. And there is that aspect to World War II as well, because that's the whole point of Hitler. But it also became, in many ways, an ideological war. And so, just as the Civil War, Sherman is responding to that, because he knows you have to defeat the people who are supporting those at the front to be able to truly win.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the army that has to be defeated. And I think for Patton, not necessarily he's looking to defeat the ideology, but in the same sense, he's fighting war differently. He sees what's going on around him differently than Sherman, than others did, just like Sherman did. He's able to see more, and being able to. What he's all about is using all the weapons he can to do the job as efficiently and as quickly as possible. And that's that. In a way, he's a Renaissance man when it comes to warfare. There is no such thing as a tool that does not go into his toolbox.
Mm-hmm. And the proof is in the pudding in the end.
Right.
Baston is just the most dramatic of it. It's one of many.
Right. The equipping or wanting to arm and train the German soldiers. That's doesn't matter where the tool comes from. If it works, I want to use it because he thinks he has another war to fight. There is another war to fight. It just didn't get fought the way he thought it would.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, that's him thinking ahead. Disengaging and attacking at the Battle of the Bulge. That's another thing. He is he's just probably the master of the trade, because he really it's not just one thing. He's not a one tool general.
The Germans feared him more than anybody else.
Well,
Yes.
that's part of the reason why, and he was not able to be told this, of course, that Eisenhower knew he had to be the bait, the misdirection. That's why he was kept in England, supposedly as the leader of the invasion. He's not
come at Calais.
Yeah, exactly. And he's not told any of this. And in many respects, that's kind of unfair to him. But it's also necessary.
Knew he was being the bait.
No, he did not know it until Third Army was activated. That's when once D-Day happened, then they went ahead and brought him in. And I don't know. No, he dies.
He thought he was really out.
He really did.
He basically thought that he was going to be sidelined for the whole thing.
Right, because he could have been. He didn't realize.
Nah, they could never have done that.
Right. Well,
not at that point.
Eisenhower really went to bat for him. He really did, because there were powerful forces that said, no, we want him gone because we can't control him. We don't think that he can be trusted. The slapping incident was just one of those. Yeah, it was unfair. He made a hell of a mistake, and he was. He said again. I keep quoting the movie because it keeps coming back. He says, in the movie, which is a quote of his actually, if you read the book. How can something so trivial in its application be so terrible in its consequences? The slaps, what he's talking about, because that's when Bradley got the moment. He's basically Eighth Army is taken away from him, given to Mark Clark, and he's sidelined for really the rest of 43 and almost the first half of 44. So it's almost a year.
It's
August.
August.
Yeah.
It's August before he's brought in theater.
Right. So it's I
it's
forget
2 months after Normandy.
Right. So I figure it's about a year. I don't remember when the slap occurred. I mean, it was in Italy.
Sicily. Yeah,
it was Sicily. Yeah. When the Eighth Army was his commander.
Well, and the sad thing is, if there hadn't been press around, wouldn't have been a thing.
I'm not sure it could have been contained. It was pretty dramatic because it's in a freaking hospital in front
Yeah,
of all these
but
witnesses. But you're right; it would not have had the sting that it had.
Yeah, I don't think he would have been
wouldn't
sidelined like that.
It wouldn't have gotten back to Washington quite as fast. That's for sure. The doctors might still have. They might have emailed or
Careful with the anachronisms there, brother.
One of the doctors might have mailed Eisenhower and complained or something like that. But the reporters guaranteed it got back to Washington really fast.
Well, not just to Washington, but that there's also the
American
threat
people.
of that would be reported to the American people.
Yeah.
Well, they even show in the movie they show a copy of an actual political cartoon that Patton gets enraged by because it shows him kicking the little soldier with a swastika on his boot, and of course he goes nuts. My foot, an iron boot with a swastika on it. Well, yeah, that's welcome to the world of politics, sir.
Well, let's take a quick break.
Patton would love bourbon. I know he was a hard drinker at times. He preferred cognac. But I'm sure that bourbon, whiskey, and such things were very much of his element.
He would do whatever he felt like the troops would want to see him do.
Oh, there's a lot of that. Yes.
Because he did see himself not just as that efficient leader, but also as a symbol. He thought it was important to be a symbol.
He got
to be what the troops expected him to be.
When you reach the level he's at, you recognize there is a certain amount of theater that you have to show. Which worked against him, of course, because he's made to apologize for the slap at every unit, one by one. And they show one of them in the movie. And you can just see George C. Scott pulling it off, walking. He prays the 22nd Psalm in a church in full dress uniform before he walks out in front, and he gives the same script. It's well written. He had to write it himself, and it's well done. But you can just see the anguish and agony that he is as he's made to eat crow, and a big steaming hot mug of it. It's not good, but yet it was. That's Farago, the author.
Yeah.
Ordeal and Triumph. That's the subtitle of the book. And that's what makes it such a great story. You have to go to the deepest, darkest depths of the moment is lost for a good story before triumph can happen.
Yes,
and that's this. His story plays to that format very, very well. Mm-hmm. Bourbon, gentlemen, we're talking about bourbon here.
Bourbon break.
Bourbon break. Evan Williams.
I was gonna say, what you drinking? You still drinking Evan Williams? Yours is on the rocks. Or
no,
was.
This glass is neat.
Oh, good.
Last time around I had some ice, but this time around I went neat for our session here at
Studio F.
Studio
second
F.
floor of the Baxter Building.
Why am I vapor locking like this?
I don't know. You still tired from yesterday?
No, I'm all right. I just not usually at that.
Vapor lock brings some unfortunate digestive imagery to my mind. I don't think we want to go there.
No,
surely not.
But I'm having some the electrical conductivity in my motor neurons isn't connected to my mouth too well this episode.
I can tell because you couldn't even get that out.
I couldn't even get
That's
that.
not like you, Martin. It really isn't. You're usually, that rapier-like wit usually comes right
Scathing,
out.
yes.
Scathing is a good very word. Robert, what are you drinking?
I'm still finishing my glass of Woodford Double Oaked.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Go-to bourbon.
Still is the best. I mean, still, if it's right up there.
If you can't have Pappy Van Winkle, this is a
right
dollar. This is good.
Worthy substitute. Yeah, I'm still working on Basil Hayden's Dark Rye. I like that powerful depth. It's good stuff, but more of it. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I like.
Because I do feel like we need to expand our bourbon selection some more, which is difficult because we don't do this often enough to go through the bottles that we drink,
and none of us drink it otherwise.
Speak of. Other than this, prior to my last pastor, which as you guys know I'm very good friends with, I did most of my drinking at the rectory.
Yeah,
which is
he's a bourbon collector
because he is. Oh yes, and he has a very fine,
vast selection.
Very fine selection.
The last time I was over there, he gave me some Pappy to drink with him.
You lucky bastard!
Well, that's right, because I had it with him once before, but it'd been a while since I'd seen him, so he broke it out with me again. So that
must have been the new bottle he got because he does not usually break it out for people twice.
No, he had gotten a new bottle.
Well,
somebody had gifted it to him.
He must think the sun shines right at your eyes.
Hey, what can I say?
Because like I said, it's rare somebody gets it twice.
I was grateful.
The retired deacon at my parish, at one of our deacon nights, we were doing. Father always said, go get whatever bourbon you want, and Deacon M. was one to say, well, I'll just grab a couple of fingers of bourbon, and he would get his pappies. Now, I have slender fingers. I do not have thick, meaty hands. I have a artist's hands. Mike on the let it out. Mike on the other hand
has meaty hands.
Yes, sausage fingers.
Oh well.
So for him, 2 fingers of bourbon is like half a glass. And so he would occasionally dip into the Pappies.
Well, yes, but he's how old is he? He's one in his 80s, I know.
No, he's not. I don't think he's at 80 yet.
Yeah, nevertheless, he is
senior deacon.
He is senior status, and he is have been around a long time and is worthy of all the admiration and reputation that he has. So yeah.
So Father got back at him though. So this is a bourbon story I haven't told. I don't know.
Oh, really?
I maybe I did when we did our bourbon episode. I don't know, but this is a great story.
Doesn't sound familiar.
So, Father, of course, he kept he will often keep the empty bottles because as we talked about before, the bourbon bottles themselves sometimes can be really neat. And having an empty bottle at Pappy's is almost as good as having a full bottle at Pappy's.
It kind of shows you know what you're doing.
Exactly. So Father filled it up with Makers, which a lot of people think Makers is a very high-end bourbon. I do not think it is a high-end bourbon. I consider it your basic regular Makers is a mixed bourbon.
It's acceptable. It's a lot of people like it.
Yeah, it's the best marketed bourbon by far.
Absolutely nothing wrong with it. We do not want to disparage this them in any way.
Now, if I'm going to have Makers, I prefer the Makers 46,
okay,
which we've had many a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but apparently Mike was drinking out of that and did not know it. Now, Mike says he did and just went along with it, but I don't know about that.
Well, how about that? Well, that's a good camouflage.
It's better than filling it with iced tea.
That's true.
Well, this is true. This is true.
If you wouldn't have known that, then
we'd have problems.
Yeah,
well, I'll be the first to admit I have some brother-in-laws that I love dearly, but they like to drink my bourbon when they come over here. So I made certain that I bought a bottle of the $12 Old Granddad and put it into a crystal flask, and it's downstairs. It's meant to be if you want to come and drink me dry, drink that one first. And I'll keep my nice bourbon upstairs here in my office in the closet where you can't find it.
So you're definitely being an alter Christus in that way, bringing out the poor wine at first, and then after
bringing
they've
out
drunk
the
freely, bringing out the
good wine. That's absolutely right. Hey, you got to do what you got to do to protect your bourbon.
That's right.
To make sure that you have some.
Yes, because hopefully after they had gotten sloshed on the inferior stuff, that they would have slowed down.
Yeah, no.
Good one, Centurion.
Nice one, Centurion. Nice one. Liked it. No, not happening.
Unfortunately, yes, that is not the case.
Back to Patton.
Patton. This is a stat that when you talk about, again, not only believing in himself, but believing in his men under his command. Between activation on 1 August 1944 and 9 May 1945, VE Day, 3rd Army, his command, saw continuous combat for 281 days.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Talk about men up to their hips in it.
Oh, yeah. Well, they moved further and faster in those 3 days of Bastogne than any other American unit had ever done in the history of the United States at that time. That record may still stand. I'm not sure.
Desert Storm might have broken that because they moved pretty far, pretty fast in that.
Right.
But
but nevertheless, it was an
they didn't have to disengage to do that.
Yeah.
Right. It was an enormous, and they mentioned that in the movie. They show a newsreel, which is an actual newsreel from the time that explains that. You kind of have to. It's such an enormous achievement. You have to bring it down to a bite-sized level to get your head around it. It's just such an enormous.
That command destroyed a significant German force.
Correct.
For the Battle of the Bulge.
That was their last gasp.
And had to pull back without reaching Antwerp.
Right, because they almost pulled it off. Von Rundstedt, who was in charge of it, was himself a bit of a tactical genius, and what he attempted was. It was audacity. There's no doubt. As Frederick the Great would say, which Patton actually quoted in the movie and was a big fan of. That's how you get there. Audacity. L'audace, toujours l'audace.
Well, audacity is one way of putting it. Another way of putting it is not just doing the unexpected, but I think it's doing what you know that you can do, and that you can. Without regard to what the other guy thinks you can do.
Right.
And it's kind of a long-winded way of explaining, but, he's so... When you think so far ahead, and you are so well... your team is so well-trained, and by well-trained, also has the ability to shift priorities and operations so quickly. Because, again, this is a team effort from the top to the bottom. If everybody's not on the same page in their what they are able to do, not necessarily what they're doing, but what they're able to do, that would have failed miserably.
These are thousands.
He could have had his army destroyed if they had disengaged poorly, because then they could have had the Germans chasing them all the way to Bastogne, and then they would have been caught in a pincer movement of their own making.
Yeah, because they're not up against some second stringer here. This was This was a seriously dangerous enterprise that he undertook. He has to basically punch through an enormously well defended and supplied German phalanx, for lack of a better term, in order to get where he's going to do, because it's surrounded. You have to punch through it to basically relieve the blockade in many ways. And von Rundstedt he was well supplied. His interior lines are very tight.
Right.
So it's not an easy thing to do. I know we keep coming back to that, and that's not all he did.
It's probably the most dramatic.
It is. Well, his victory at El Gatar, which is shown early in the movie because it takes place in North Africa right after he lands, was an enormous sea change is the word I'm looking for, because the American army had just gotten their asses kicked at Kasserine Pass. And General Friedenthal, who was in charge of that army before Patton came there, has gotten a lot of reputational grief over the years, and kind of rightly so, for his terrible mismanagement of things, because it was one of the greatest defeats in the American army ever took place. And yet, by bringing in the right person, which of course is how the movie begins, saying, what we need here is somebody tough enough to bring this outfit together. And we were talking about this in the show prep. And Michael Strong from Star Trek, What Are Little Girls Made Of, plays the colonel who is on his staff. He says Patton, and Bradley says possibly, and he goes, God help us, which is still one of my favorite lines. But it explains everything so perfectly, because Patton comes in and takes this absolutely defeated, demoralized, inefficient disaster of a command, turns it around, and whips the Germans at their own game just barely a month or so later from Kasserine to El Gatar. It's amazing. And of course, because of who he is and how he read Rommel's book, which he says in the movie, and it was a very famous quote that he actually said, Rommel, you magnificent bastard, I read your book. It was all very, very true. You cannot underestimate the value of that accomplishment.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting in that not only is he this advocate for armored warfare and one of the key developers of it, but he understood, like you said, Robert, other people are doing it too. Other people are analyzing this. I need to know. I need to think the way they think. I need to know what they know. And so he studied and knew what to do.
He knew Rommel, which was easy to know, because essentially Rommel was the tactical genius behind the entire Blitzkrieg. He's the one that was his philosophy that they followed.
Yeah.
But of course, by this time, this is 1942. Well, the fall of France was 2 years ago. We kind of know their tactics now.
Yeah. And it's Patton's tactics too. He believed in speed.
He already had it.
Yeah, he believed in speed.
He was a believer along with Rommel. They were both visionaries in that.
Hit fast with everything you got.
That is in all warfare. Hit as fast as you can, as hard as you can, is a universal principle. Now the question is, do you remember it when you are actually executing?
Yeah, based on the tools and the tactics that you have available to you.
Right.
Yes.
Because, for a long time, warfare became a battle of defense. And there is no speed when you're on the defensive. Because you're waiting for the other guy to show up.
Well, yeah.
And if you have a good enough fortress that can work in a pre-industrialized warfare.
Well, the trenches were essentially that in World War I, with the proper defenders behind it. Patton, of course, had known that, as did Rommel.
Well, trenches worked in the Civil War to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I mean, it stopped Grant at Petersburg.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But Grant didn't have the tools that they did in World War I.
That's correct. Nor did Lee.
And nor did Lee.
Which makes a lot of difference.
So that's why trenches, ultimately they were okay because people were still, World War I was that war that happened just as the technology changed drastically. A lot of times, a lot of these changes happen between the wars. Between World War I and World War II, lots of changes. Because they're taking what they learned in the prior war and applying it.
I mean,
World War I, the machine gun and the tank they were just learning how to apply those.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time you get to the end of that war, you realize, oh my God, trenches are a really bad idea.
Well, doctrine has changed.
Right, doctrine
Completely,
has changed,
yeah.
yes. Because the tools have changed.
Exactly. And those who recognize that succeed.
Right.
Those who don't.
It's like the aircraft carrier.
Which we talked about.
Doctrine changed.
Yep.
Because doctrine needed to change because the tools have changed. And having all of those battleships, looks really good. And you do a lot of really big stuff with it. But they're floating targets for a good Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
So, Patton, worthy hero. Again, that same sort of, the way he appeals to me the same way Sherman appeals. Mm-hmm. That eccentric, that outside of the mold guy, but knew what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew what his men could do because he had done it.
Yeah, he's more than a master of his craft. He is that, which we admire. We would admire him if
he
was
redefined the craft.
Well, that's correct. It's even bigger than that. We would admire him if all he was the master craftsman. He goes beyond that because he redefines the craft in of itself. And leadership is a universal that, unfortunately, there's plenty of examples of good leaders throughout history, throughout the world, but so often we find it hard to find the really good ones. Yeah. When you find the really good ones, they deserve to be heralded as heroes.
I think the reason that he is a great hero is, unlike so many, even the ones we've brought up, but unlike so many people that are looked up to as heroes, they have fundamental character flaws.
Yeah.
And ones that, when we look, whether through the eyes of their time or our time, those flaws are there.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that Patton doesn't have flaws, but generally the issues that we see with him are ones of momentary lapses of his better character, as opposed to, this is just the way he really is. The slapping the soldier, even though that was a humiliating thing for him to apologize for, I think in general that's out of character, and that's probably why it's so humiliating for him.
He lost his temper. Yeah.
And
he didn't
that's
usually
not him.
do that.
He was so moved by the sacrifices of the other men.
Right.
That's right. Because nobody could ever accuse Patton of not having deep feelings, because he did, and this is one of those times where that got
he took care of his men generally,
and it got the better of him.
He got everything he could get for him.
He's gone on record many years later saying, when it came to that slapping of the soldiers, he said, "I wish I'd kissed the son of a bitch."
Well, it couldn't have been too many more years, because
it's right. Yeah,
for the rest after he died.
Right, but for the rest of his time, it was very common.
I think if you take that encounter with that soldier who was basically crying because, if I remember correctly,
it's shell shock. Yeah.
It's shell shock.
PTSD.
What we call PTSD,
which was completely.
But he was crying because he couldn't handle it. He was broken. If that had happened in any other context, where he had not just gone through and seen all these mangled, broken bodies, he would have had compassion for that. I think it would have been a different thing.
He would have not done what he even a slap.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been. I feel so bad for you. Come here, let me give you a hug. That's not Patton.
No.
But it wouldn't have been the anger, the losing his temper, leading to the slap,
right?
Because it was such a diametrically opposed situation.
Yeah,
and
the moment was the right moment,
right?
For it to
or
happen.
if he'd encountered that man first, as opposed to seeing the other guys first,
he would have come down on him, but he would not have had.
He'd probably grabbed him and said, "Come with me. I want to show you. I want to show you some people that really."
Yeah,
maybe maybe he would have slapped him. I don't know, but it just doesn't seem like.
Yeah.
Given the depth of.
Here's one little nugget that I thought was pretty interesting, and I think ties to what you're saying, Robert. From what I've read, he's the first general officer to integrate the rifle companies.
Oh, yes. I'd forgotten about that, yeah.
So, here's a guy, again, he believed in people. He believed in what they could do, and wanted to use every tool in the belt, and thought one soldier was the equal of another as long as you did your job.
Right.
Well, one of his staff people was a staff sergeant named Meeks, who's African American, and he stayed with him. He was literally the guy that put together the hunting trip that Patton went on the day of his his eventually fatal injury.
Yeah.
It's interesting for I would guess, just given his age, the period he grew up in, he used words we would not use today.
Yes, it's complicated,
But
yes,
the devil, I think, is in the details, meaning how did he treat the men in the field with him? Mm-hmm. And he would not, if he had been a raging racist, which today, prima facie evidence of that would be that he might have used the N-word, which maybe he did. Probably did, given his age and the time of the that we're talking about. Most of the people we're talking about would have.
And keep in mind that his background is generally Southern.
Is generally Southern.
It is, although he considered himself a Californian.
By that time, yes.
Yeah.
He had married a Californian.
The point is, though, that's not the way he treated the man.
Yeah.
He would never have trusted that man, Meeks, to be his confidant, essentially, because at that level...
He was.
He's a personal aide, he's confidant. You would not do that if you were a raging racist.
Yeah, and Meeks served with him pretty much for the entire war. And they even have some moments in the movies, because it's when he's the one that breaks the news to Patton that Bradley got the command. He said, "Did you hear it? We all heard it on the radio." And he kind of says, "I can see you're kind of sad tonight, General." And then his chief of staff, Codman, comes in with a bottle of wine and says, "I'd like to share this with you tonight." He says, "Well, maybe not. If you get some cognac, I'll help you."
So, that's why I like him, because never mind the fact that he was great at what he did. I mean, that's always part of it. But it just seems like the personal failings are on the small scale, not the big scale.
Yeah.
That's very well put. I like that.
Yeah.
That's a rare thing.
Yeah. Yeah, when the big stuff he got right.
Right. Because, we can look at some of the people we've talked about, guys who've had affairs. And I won't name names, but, just about all of them have done that.
Well, Patton did too.
Yeah. At least he claimed one.
Hey, we did.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It was his wife's niece, actually.
Oh, now that one I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, there's some historians that think, well, it didn't really happen. He was just trying to brag because, again, he's out of
favor and all that stuff.
And he's trying to build his masculinity back up.
It's portrayed in the movie, and Jean Gordon was her name, and she pretty much said after the fact, "Yeah, we did," and there was some controversy about that. But it's pretty much, historians have pretty much come down and found that yes, he did. It was
okay. Well, that sort of tempers what I just said.
It was not well known at the time.
But apparently, that's a one-time thing.
It was.
Whereas some of the guys we've talked about have been serial.
Yeah, no, it was a one-time thing. It went on for several years, and in fact, the movie shows it pretty well.
Again, not making excuses.
Yeah,
by any means, but it kind of Patton did love his wife. Things were complicated with him. She was absolutely devoted to him. Eva Marie Saint played her in the movie Last Days of Patton, and of course she's a tremendous actress. Their togetherness and their devotion to each other, even despite his failings as a husband at times, it plays through. It's just one more complication here of Patton.
I guess that sort of takes away some of the thunder for what I was saying. But it's better to have it out there, because I was not aware of that.
He defies putting into a box. God knows we keep trying, and yet he's so good at so many things. And man, then he does this, and he does this.
Yeah, and then that's kind of seems like again something he's got in common with Sherman. Very hard to put in a box.
Well, yeah, he resists definition. Well, we're sure
what? Anybody who lives life who is fully human, and by fully human I mean tries to live out their life to the best of their ability, fully with gusto, being the best that they can be. There's complications.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sherman himself had a very successful marriage, and yet was also unfaithful. So
that almost goes hat in hand with the military life, and
there's some of that. And I don't want to use that as an excuse.
Yeah.
But yes,
especially when you're talking about a time when travel took months to go from one place to another.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you don't.
And you didn't have the wife with you. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying I see how that happens.
There are certain systems and situations that are set up that don't help matters.
Right.
And sometimes bad things that shouldn't happen do.
Yeah.
Because it's easy.
Here we are, Trevor Slattery again.
It's complicated.
It's complicated, but There's a lot about Patton.
That's correct.
Again,
and I'm glad you
innovator
gave us the opportunity to talk about that, about him, that personal failing of his, because it humanizes him some after the fact. We want to get it right. We want to make sure we don't want to turn this into a glowing portrayal.
Yeah, I don't want it to be a virtual circle jerk with Patton in the middle.
You said I wasn't going to say it, but you're exactly right.
Well, again, Robert cutting to the point. So anyway, we better wrap up, guys.
Because we're about in an hour. I see your fingers over there on 6.
Yeah, so we're right there, and I know we don't want to go too far. We have
covered the man well.
Yeah,
I think that I will say this: watch the movies. I know there are many people who don't like the made-for-TV sequel because it's depressing. Yeah, it's basically him being dumb, getting relieved, getting injured, and dying. Yeah, it's just kind of... But it is a fitting coda to that. I will say this. George C. Scott's voice is nothing like George S. Patton's. Scott has that deep, gravelly voice that's booming, and that it fits the legend of the man. But Patton himself had a falsetto voice, extremely high pitched. He was made fun of it a lot of times because it did not match his personality.
High and squeaky.
But you should definitely look up most any books on Patton that you can find. Are really good. Martin Blumenson is one of his primo biographers. He's written several. They're very accessible, very readable. I mean, if you can find the Farago book,
Bradley's
book himself, which is it's
a first-hand account
of
with
everything.
Him. It's not necessarily all of Patton, but it's a first-hand encounter with Patton, at least in part.
And Farago uses that as a basis. So if you can find his book. I'm not even sure that it's in print anymore. I suspect it is. I mean, my printing was from the 70s, from shortly after the movie. It's a thick paperback that I got. It's a tight read though. You'll blow through it very quickly.
Cool. Interesting.
All right.
Next time, Francis.
Oh my goodness! Next time around, episode 100.
The century mark.
We've done it, boys. We've done it.
It's going to be a retrospective. We've been talking about this one for months, folks. About what is it? What is Snakes and Otters about? How did we get here? What's so great about us? What's our favorite
we did
stuff?
episode 0. We listened to a little bit of that the other day.
Yeah,
and I never cared for episode 0 all that much because it was a little too scripted for my taste.
Well, and it was.
And I'm not. We are not all about the script.
No, that's the only thing we've ever actually scripted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it even sounds scripted to me.
Well, it was meant to be an advertisement.
Yeah.
Which we've got.
Though, I think we can much better define and delineate what it is to be Snakes and Otters.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when I wrote the script for that, and we had only made...
Well, we all rewrote it.
Exactly. We were all parts of it.
Yeah.
It
was your basis.
We were, 15, 16 episodes in? We had just started going weekly at that time.
Yeah.
So we just kind of figured, well, this is what we think. It's not wrong. But, man, we are so much more than that now. 100 episodes in. Martin wanted me to remind you, too, that we've actually...
Robert did.
Yeah, that's right. Robert told me that. We've actually, if you look on our providers, you'll see more than... the numbers are a little higher than that because we did a few specials here and there. Yeah. Episode 0 was 1, and we did a few other different specials.
The COVID special.
The COVID special. And
we redid a couple. We broke a couple apart, I think.
Yeah.
Just the Marcus Aurelius...
Yeah,
merged back together and broke apart and merged back together again.
Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of close enough, but we're putting the stake in the ground and saying, no, this is our 100th official episode, and we're going to have a party, and it's going to be great, and we want you to join us.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.